The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Yates Xander collapsed against his horse's neck, his body burning with a fever so fierce he could hardly see straight through the shimmering heat waves that seemed to radiate from his own skin. He had been riding for 3 days straight across the open plains of western Nebraska, driving a small herd of cattle toward the stockyards in Council Bluffs, Iowa, when the sickness struck him like a rattlesnake's bite. At first, it was just a tickle in his throat, a weariness that he attributed to the long hours in the saddle and the unforgiving August sun of 1876. But by the second day, his muscles ached something terrible, and by the third morning, he knew he was in real trouble. The cattle had scattered during the night when he lost consciousness, and now he found himself alone on the endless prairie, miles from any town or settlement, with nothing but grass stretching in every direction and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Yates managed to dismount, though he nearly fell face first into the dirt. His legs trembled as he led his horse to a shallow creek he could hear bubbling nearby. The animal drank gratefully while Yates collapsed beside the water, dunking his whole head under the cool surface. It felt like heaven for about 10 seconds, then the fever came roaring back with a vengeance. He crawled to a nearby cottonwood tree, the only real shade for miles, and propped himself against the trunk. His canteen was nearly empty, his food supplies down to some hardtack and jerky that his stomach immediately rejected when he tried to eat. He had maybe a day, 2 if he was lucky, before the fever either broke or killed him. Out here, alone with no one knowing where he was, those odds did not favor survival. The sun climbed higher, and Yates drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever dreams mixing with reality until he could not tell one from the other. He dreamed of his childhood in Tennessee, of the war that had stolen his father and older brother, of the westward journey his mother had insisted on after the surrender. She had died of cholera 3 years back, leaving Yates alone at 22 to make his way in a world that seemed determined to grind down anyone without family or fortune. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, whatever paid enough to keep him fed and sheltered. This cattle drive was supposed to be his big break, a chance to earn enough money to maybe buy a small piece of land and start his own operation. Now, it looked like the prairie would claim him just like it had claimed so many others. Penelope Dalton had been riding since before dawn, pushing her mare hard across the grasslands. She was searching for strays from her father's herd, cattle that had wandered off during a storm 2 nights prior. Her father, Samuel Dalton, owned one of the larger ranches near the Nebraska-Iowa border, and while he had ranch hands aplenty, Penelope had always been the best tracker in the family. She had learned from her mother, who had learned from a Pawnee woman who had once worked on the ranch. Penelope could read signs in the grass and dirt that most men would ride right past without noticing. She was 19 years old. With long chestnut hair she kept braided down her back and green eyes that could spot a calf in thick brush from 100 yards away. Her mother had passed when Penelope was 15, and since then, she had taken on more and more responsibilities around the ranch. Her father sometimes worried she spent too much time working and not enough time being courted by the local young men. But Penelope had little patience for the clumsy advances of ranch hands who saw her as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. She preferred the company of horses and the open sky, the wind in her face and the knowledge that she could ride anywhere she wanted, at least within the boundaries of her father's land. She had been tracking the strays for hours when she noticed something odd in the distance. A horse, still saddled, grazing near a cottonwood tree. No rider in sight, which immediately set off alarm bells in her head. A cowboy did not leave his horse saddled unless something was very wrong. She urged her mare forward, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle secured to her saddle. As she drew closer, she saw the figure slumped against the tree trunk, barely moving. Penelope dismounted quickly, ground tying her horse before approaching the man. He was young, maybe a few years older than herself, with dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His skin was pale beneath a working tan, and even from a few feet away she could see him trembling. She knelt beside him, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead. He was burning up, his fever so high she was amazed he was still breathing. "Hey," she said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" Yates's eyes fluttered open, but they did not seem to focus on anything. He mumbled something she could not understand, his voice thick and confused. Penelope looked around quickly, assessing the situation. They were at least 10 miles from her father's ranch, maybe 15 from the nearest town. Moving him in this condition could be dangerous, but leaving him here alone would certainly be fatal. She bit her lip, thinking fast. The sun was climbing higher, and the temperature was already approaching 90 degrees. If she was going to help him, she needed to bring his fever down first, get some water in him, and then figure out how to transport him somewhere safer. She moved to his horse, a sturdy sorrel gelding who eyed her warily but did not protest when she began rifling through the saddlebags. She found his canteen nearly empty and a bedroll, not much else. She took the bedroll and her own supplies back to the cottonwood, quickly spreading out a blanket in the shade. Then she grabbed both canteens and hurried to the creek, filling them with cool water. When she returned, she lifted Yates's head and tried to get him to drink. At first he choked and sputtered, but then his body's desperate need for water took over, and he swallowed several mouthfuls before falling back against the tree. Penelope soaked her bandana in the creek water and pressed it to his forehead, his neck, his wrists. She had seen her mother nurse sick ranch hands through fevers before, and she remembered the basics. Keep them cool, keep them hydrated, and pray that whatever infection had taken hold would run its course without killing them first. She worked steadily, changing the wet cloth every few minutes as the sun heated it back up, coaxing small sips of water past his cracked lips, whispering reassurances that she was not sure he could even hear. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Penelope never left his side. She knew she should ride back to the ranch, get help, bring a wagon and her father's men. But something kept her rooted to that spot. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, who had always said that leaving a sick person alone was a sin against God and humanity. Maybe it was the way the man's face, even twisted with fever, looked gentle and good, like someone who had known hardship but had not let it make him mean. Or maybe it was just stubbornness, the same quality that made her refuse to give up on a difficult horse or a newborn calf struggling to survive. Whatever the reason, Penelope stayed. As evening approached, Yates's fever seemed to intensify. He thrashed weakly, muttering words she could not make out, his body fighting a battle she could not see. Penelope pulled him onto the bedroll, cushioning his head with her saddle blanket. She built a small fire as the temperature began to drop, knowing that while he was hot with fever, the night air would be cold, and she needed to keep him from getting chilled once the sun went down. She made a weak broth from some dried beef she had in her saddlebags, managing to get a few spoonfuls into him before he turned his head away. Night fell over the prairie, bringing with it a chorus of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Penelope sat with her back against the cottonwood, the sick cowboy's head resting on a folded blanket beside her. She kept the fire going and continued her vigil, changing the cool compress, offering water whenever he stirred. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, checking to make sure he was still breathing, still fighting. It was near dawn when the fever finally began to break. Penelope noticed it first in the way his breathing became less labored, the way his thrashing stilled into something closer to natural sleep. She pressed her hand to his forehead and felt that while he was still warm, the terrible burning heat had diminished. Relief flooded through her so strongly that she felt tears prick at her eyes. She had not realized how scared she had been, how certain that she was watching a man die, until the danger began to pass. Yates woke slowly, consciousness returning in fragments. At first he thought he was dead, because surely he was being attended by an angel. But as his vision cleared, he realized the woman leaning over him was very much alive, with dirt smudged on her cheek and exhaustion written in every line of her face. She had the most striking green eyes he had ever seen, and they were watching him with a mixture of relief and concern. "You are awake," she said softly, and her voice was like cool water after a long drought. "How do you feel?" Yates tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. She seemed to understand, lifting his head gently and bringing a canteen to his lips. He drank gratefully, the water the best thing he had ever tasted. When he finished, he managed to croak out a single word: "Better." She smiled, and even through his lingering weakness, Yates felt something shift in his chest. "Good, you gave me quite a scare. I found you yesterday morning, burning up with fever. You have been out of your head for almost a full day and night." He tried to process this information. A full day. This woman, this stranger, had stayed with him for a full day and night, alone on the open range, nursing him through a fever that could easily have killed him. "Why?" he managed to ask. Penelope's smile faded into something more serious. "Because leaving someone to die alone is not something I could live with. My name is Penelope Dalton. My father owns a ranch about 10 miles east of here." "Yates," he said, his voice getting stronger with each word. "Yates Xander. I was driving cattle toward Council Bluffs when I took sick." He paused, a horrible realization dawning. "The cattle, they scattered, I lost them." "Cattle can be found or replaced," Penelope said firmly. "Your life cannot. You rest now. When you are strong enough to ride, I will take you back to my father's ranch. You need proper food and a real bed, not just a bedroll under a tree." Yates wanted to argue, wanted to say he needed to find those cattle, that his whole future depended on completing that drive. But his body betrayed him, exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep. The last thing he saw before his eyes closed was Penelope's face, illuminated by the early morning light, watching over him with a protectiveness that made his heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with fever. He slept through most of the morning, waking periodically to find Penelope still there, always ready with water or a bit of food. She had caught a rabbit somehow and made a proper stew that she fed him in small portions, letting his stomach adjust after being empty for so long. By afternoon he felt strong enough to sit up without her help, though his head still swam with dizziness. "You are a good nurse," he said, accepting another cup of broth. "Your mother teach you." Something flickered across Penelope's face, a shadow of old grief. "She did. She passed 4 years ago. Pneumonia took her one winter, came on fast and took her faster." "I am sorry," Yates said, and meant it. "I lost my mother 3 years back, cholera. It is a hard thing, being alone in the world." Penelope met his eyes, and in that moment, they understood each other in a way that went beyond words. They had both known loss. Both learned to be strong because the alternative was to break. Both found themselves navigating a world that was often cruel to those without family to back them up. "You are not married?" Yates asked, then immediately felt like a fool. Of course she was not married, or she would not be out here alone nursing strange cowboys back to health. But Penelope did not seem offended by the question. "No." Most men around here want a wife who will stay home and cook and sew and give them babies. I am not very good at staying home." She said it matter-of-factly, without shame or apology. "What about you? Never had the money or the stability to offer a woman anything worth having," Yates admitted. "Been drifting from job to job since the war ended. This cattle drive was supposed to change that. I was going to get paid enough to maybe buy some land, start building something that belonged to me. Now." He trailed off, looking at the empty prairie around them. "Now you are alive," Penelope said firmly. "Which means you can find another way. The world does not end just because one plan fails." She stood, brushing dirt off her split riding skirt. "Can you stand? We should try to get you on your horse, see if you can manage the ride back to the ranch." "My father will be worried, and you need a proper bed and hot food." Yates accepted her hand and let her help him to his feet. The world tilted alarmingly for a moment, but her steady grip kept him upright until his equilibrium returned. She was strong, he realized, not just in spirit but in body. He could feel the lean muscle in her arm, the sureness of her stance. This was a woman who worked hard and did not shy away from difficulty. They made it to the horses, and with Penelope's help, Yates managed to haul himself into the saddle. His sorrel gelding shifted under his weight but held steady. Penelope mounted her own mare with easy grace, then moved close enough that she could grab his reins if he started to fall. "We will take it slow," she said. "If you need to stop, tell me. Pride is not worth dying for." The ride back to the Dalton ranch took several hours. Yates's strength waned as they went, and twice he had to stop and rest, but Penelope never showed impatience or frustration. She simply waited, offered him water, and then they continued. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they finally crested a low rise, and Yates saw the ranch spread out below them. It was an impressive operation, larger than he had expected. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. There were multiple barns, corrals full of horses and cattle, bunkhouses for the ranch hands, and various outbuildings whose purposes Yates could only guess at. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, and Yates could see people moving about their evening tasks, tiny figures in the distance. As they rode into the ranch yard, a man emerged from the house, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who was both relieved and angry. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his hair more gray than brown, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. Samuel Dalton, Yates assumed, and braced himself for the justified anger of a father whose daughter had been gone for more than a day without word. "Penelope Grace Dalton," Samuel called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Where in the name of all that is holy have you been? I was about to send the men out searching for you." Penelope dismounted and walked toward her father, her chin lifted in that stubborn way Yates was already beginning to recognize. "I found a man dying of fever out on the range. I could not leave him, so I stayed and nursed him through it. He is weak but recovering. We need to get him inside, get some proper food in him, and let him rest in a real bed." Samuel's anger deflated as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by concern and something that might have been pride. He looked past his daughter to Yates, who was doing his best to sit straight in the saddle despite feeling like he might fall over at any moment. "Can you walk, son?" "Yes, sir," Yates said, dismounting with more care than grace. His legs wobbled, but he stayed upright through sheer determination. Samuel moved forward, taking Yates's arm and draping it over his own shoulders. "Stubborn fool, riding cattle alone in this heat. You are lucky my daughter found you. Come on, let us get you inside. Penelope, tell Maria we need broth and bread and make up the guest room." The next few hours passed in a blur for Yates. He was installed in a comfortable room on the second floor of the house, helped into a clean nightshirt that must have belonged to Samuel Dalton, and fed warm broth by a stern-faced Mexican woman named Maria, who seemed to be equal parts housekeeper and family. She clucked over him like a worried hen, muttering in Spanish about foolish young men who did not have the sense God gave a goat. But her hands were gentle as she checked his forehead for fever and made sure he ate every drop of the broth she had prepared. Penelope appeared in the doorway several times, checking on him with those penetrating green eyes. Each time, Yates felt his heart do something strange in his chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with the woman who had saved his life. He tried to thank her, but she waved away his words. "Rest," she said simply. "We can talk when you are stronger." Yates slept deeply that night, the first real sleep he had had in days. He woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon and coffee drifting up from downstairs. His fever had broken completely, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He managed to dress himself in his own clothes, which someone had washed and left folded on a chair, and made his way downstairs on unsteady legs. The dining room was a warm, lived-in space with a long table that could seat a dozen people easily. Samuel Dalton sat at the head of the table, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. Penelope sat to his right, already dressed for the day in practical riding clothes, her hair in its customary braid. Maria bustled in from the kitchen carrying a platter of eggs and bacon, followed by a younger woman with the same dark hair and eyes who must have been her daughter. "Good, you are up," Samuel said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Sit down before you fall down. Maria, get this boy some food. He looks like a strong wind would blow him over." Yates sat gratefully, accepting the plate of food that was placed in front of him. He ate slowly, conscious of his still delicate stomach, but everything tasted incredible after days of fever and hardtack. As he ate, Samuel questioned him about his background, his work, his plans. Yates answered honestly, explaining about the cattle drive, the fever, the cattle he had lost. "Those cattle belong to anyone in particular?" Samuel asked. "A rancher named Tom Hutchins runs a spread about 60 miles west of here. He hired me to drive them to the stockyards in Council Bluffs. I was supposed to meet up with his regular crew there, but I guess I will not be making that meeting now." Samuel considered this. "Hutchins is a good man." "I know him. He will not hold the loss against you, not if he knows you nearly died trying. But you will need to send him word, let him know what happened. In the meantime, you need to stay here and recover your strength. No point in you heading back out onto the range half dead. You can work for me for a few weeks, earn back your strength and some money to replace what you lost on the drive." Yates felt gratitude swell in his chest. "Sir, I do not know what to say. That is more than generous." "It is practical," Samuel corrected. "I can always use another hand, especially one my daughter says has sense enough not to mistreat his horse." He shot a glance at Penelope, who was doing an admirable job of looking innocent. "Besides, you owe your life to Penelope. The least you can do is stick around long enough for us to make sure you are truly recovered." And so Yates Xander found himself, quite unexpectedly, becoming a temporary member of the Dalton Ranch. The first few days, he was not allowed to do much beyond light chores. He mended tack, helped Maria in the kitchen garden, and did other tasks that kept him close to the ranch house. But as his strength returned, Samuel put him to work on more demanding jobs. Yates proved himself a capable hand, good with horses and cattle, willing to work hard and learn quickly. He also found himself spending more and more time with Penelope. She seemed to seek him out during the day, appearing at his elbow when he was working in the corrals or riding out to check on the herds. They fell into easy conversation, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother's death and how it had changed the family. He told her about Tennessee, about the war that had destroyed his childhood home, about his dreams of someday having land of his own. Why land? Penelope asked one afternoon as they rode together along the ranch's northern boundary. Why not just keep working as a hired hand? Less responsibility, less risk. Yates was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to put it into words. Because I want to build something that is mine. Something that no one can take away or burn down or tell me I do not deserve. Maybe it is foolish, but I want to know that my work is going towards something permanent, something that might last beyond my own life. Penelope nodded slowly. It is not foolish. I understand wanting to build something. That is what my father did, what my mother helped him do. This ranch is their legacy. Sometimes I wonder what my legacy will be. You could have this ranch, Yates pointed out. Your father will not live forever, and you know this place better than anyone. Maybe, Penelope said, but she did not sound convinced. But there are plenty of people who think a woman cannot run a ranch alone. My father has cousins back east who have hinted more than once that when he passes, the ranch should go to a man who can manage it properly. Never mind that I have been helping manage it since I was 15. The injustice of it made Yates's blood boil. He had seen Penelope work. She was as capable as any man on the ranch, more capable than most. The idea that she might be passed over simply because of her sex seemed absurd and cruel. Then you will just have to prove them wrong, he said. Show them that you can run this place better than any man they could name. Penelope smiled at him, and Yates felt that strange flutter in his chest again. I like the way you think, Yates Xander. As the weeks passed, Yates came to realize that what he felt for Penelope Dalton was far more than gratitude or friendship. He was falling in love with her, deeply and irrevocably. It was there in the way his heart lifted every time he saw her, the way he found excuses to be near her, the way her laughter made even the hardest day seem worthwhile. He loved her strength and her stubbornness, her kindness and her capability. He loved the way she sat a horse like she was born in the saddle, the way she could gentle a wild colt with patience and soft words, the way she looked at the prairie like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. But Yates also knew he had nothing to offer her. He was a drifter with no land, no money, no prospects beyond the wages Samuel paid him. Penelope Dalton deserved someone established, someone who could give her the security and comfort she deserved. So he kept his feelings locked away, buried deep where they could not embarrass either of them. What Yates did not know was that Penelope was fighting the same battle. She had not meant to fall in love with the cowboy she had found dying on the range, but love had crept up on her like a prairie sunrise, gradual and then all at once overwhelming. She loved his quiet strength, the way he worked hard without complaint, the gentleness in his hands when he handled animals. She loved his dreams of building something permanent, his refusal to let hardship make him bitter. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth admiring, not just her father's daughter or a woman to be courted for her inheritance. But Penelope also knew the reality of their situation. Her father liked Yates well enough as a ranch hand, but that did not mean he would approve of him as a suitor. Samuel Dalton wanted his daughter to marry well, to someone with land and money, someone who could provide for her and help secure the ranch's future. A drifting cowboy, no matter how good-hearted, did not fit that picture. The tension between what they felt and what they could not say stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. It finally broke on an evening in late September. The weather had begun to turn, the brutal heat of August giving way to cooler nights and the first hints of autumn. Yates had been at the ranch for nearly 6 weeks, and Samuel had hinted that he would be welcome to stay on permanently if he wanted. It was a generous offer, more than Yates had any right to expect, but the idea of staying on as a hired hand while watching Penelope eventually marry someone else was more than he could bear. He was in the barn, settling the horses for the night, when Penelope found him. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun, and for a moment Yates forgot how to breathe. She walked toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. "You are planning to leave," she said. It was not a question. Yates set down the brush he had been using on his horse and turned to face her fully. "I have been thinking about it. Your father has been more than generous, but I cannot work here forever. I need to find my own way, start building toward what I want." "What do you want?" Penelope asked, moving closer. Yates felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "I want land of my own. A place to build a house, raise cattle, maybe a family someday. I want something permanent, something real, with anyone in particular." Penelope's voice was soft, but her eyes were fierce. Yates knew he should lie, should protect them both from the impossibility of what he felt. But standing there in the dimming light, with Penelope looking at him like he held the answer to a question she was afraid to ask, he found he could not do it. "With you," he said simply. "If I am being honest, everything I want involves you, but I have nothing to offer you, Penelope. I am a cowboy with no land, no money, no future beyond the next job. You deserve so much more than that." Penelope closed the remaining distance between them, reaching up to touch his face with a gentleness that made his heart ache. "You really are a fool, Yates Xander. Do you think I care about money or land? I have land. I know how to run a ranch. What I do not have is someone who sees me as a partner, someone who respects what I can do and does not want to change me into something I am not. What I do not have is someone who makes me feel like my heart might burst just from being in the same room with them. What I do not have is you." Yates stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Penelope, I cannot ask you to give up your inheritance, your home, for a man with nothing but dreams. You are not asking. I am offering." Penelope's voice was steady, sure. "I love you, Yates. I have loved you since you looked at me with those fever-bright eyes and trusted me to save you. I have loved you through every day since, watching you work and dream and be kind to people and animals alike. I do not care if you have land or money. We can build those things together. But I cannot build a life with someone I do not love, no matter how much land they own." Yates felt something break open in his chest, a dam of emotion he had been holding back for weeks. He pulled Penelope into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world because she was. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "God help me, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Penelope tilted her head back and Yates kissed her. It was not a tentative first kiss but a declaration, a promise, a claiming. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers threading through his hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Penelope was smiling in a way that made Yates want to kiss her all over again. "So what now?" he asked. "I doubt your father will be thrilled about his daughter falling in love with a hired hand." Penelope's smile turned mischievous. "Then we will just have to convince him that you are more than a hired hand, that you are someone with vision and drive and the ability to help build something great. Leave my father to me." Convincing Samuel Dalton turned out to be less difficult than either of them had anticipated, though not without some tense moments. When Penelope announced at dinner the next evening that she and Yates were in love and intended to marry, Samuel's face went through several interesting color changes. He spent a long moment staring at his daughter, then at Yates, then back at his daughter. "You are serious," he finally said. Completely, Penelope replied, her voice calm but firm. Yates is a good man, father, you know it. You have seen him work, seen his character. I love him and he loves me. I am asking for your blessing, but with or without it, I intend to marry him. Samuel turned his attention to Yates, who was doing his best not to look like he wanted to bolt from the room. And you, what do you have to say for yourself? Yates took a deep breath, meeting Samuel's eyes directly. Sir, I know I do not have much to offer your daughter in terms of material wealth, but I can promise you that I will work harder than any man alive to make sure she is happy and taken care of. I love her, Mr. Dalton. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of her. Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, a smile began to spread across his weathered face. You know, my wife's father said almost the exact same thing to me when I asked to marry her. He was a wealthy man, owned a big spread down in Texas. I was nobody, just a cowboy with big dreams and empty pockets. But Sarah, she loved me, and she convinced her father to give us a chance. Best decision any of us ever made. He stood up, walked around the table, and extended his hand to Yates. You have my blessing, son. But if you ever hurt her, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Yates shook Samuel's hand, relief flooding through him. I understand, sir. Thank you. Though there is one condition, Samuel added, his expression turning serious. This ranch is going to be Penelope's someday. That means it will be yours too if you marry her. But I need to know that you understand what that means. This is not about you coming in and taking over. This is about you being a partner to my daughter, supporting her decisions, respecting her knowledge and judgment. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Yates said without hesitation. Penelope knows this ranch better than I ever will. I would be a fool not to listen to her. Besides, that is what I want too, a partnership, not a dictatorship. Samuel nodded, satisfied. Then we will have a wedding to plan. Maria will be beside herself with excitement. That woman has been trying to marry off Penelope for years. They were married in early November of 1876, in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The local preacher presided, and most of the ranch hands and neighboring families attended. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk for years, altered slightly to fit her taller frame. Yates wore a new suit that Samuel insisted on buying, claiming that his future son-in-law could not get married in trail-worn dungarees and a work shirt. As Yates watched Penelope walk toward him, the autumn sunlight making her hair glow like burnished copper, he thought about how close he had come to dying on that open range. If Penelope had not found him, if she had not stayed and fought for his life, he would never have known this happiness. It seemed impossible that just a few months ago they had been strangers, and now they were about to promise their lives to each other. But sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them, born out of hardship and chance, and the simple decision to care for another human being in their moment of greatest need. The ceremony was short but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Penelope with all the love and gratitude and hope he felt in his heart. The assembled guests cheered, and Maria dabbed at her eyes with her apron, muttering in Spanish about beautiful young love. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. Tables were set up outside, laden with food that Maria and several of the ranch wives had prepared. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, pies made from the last of the season's apples, and jugs of cider and beer for those who wanted them. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon music filled the air, pulling people onto the makeshift dance floor. Yates danced with his new wife, then with Maria, then with several of the neighbor ladies who wanted to welcome him properly into the community. Penelope danced with her father, tears streaming down both their faces, and Yates felt his throat tighten watching them. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Yates pulled Penelope away from the celebration, leading her to the barn where they had first confessed their love to each other. They stood in the quiet dimness, listening to the sounds of the party continuing in the distance, wrapped in each other's arms. "Happy?" Yates asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Ridiculously so," Penelope replied, looking up at him with those green eyes that had captivated him from the first moment he had seen them. "Though I have a confession to make." "What is that?" "When I found you out there on the range, dying from fever, I had a feeling. Like fate had put you in my path for a reason. I told myself I was being foolish, that I was just nursing a sick man and that would be the end of it. But some part of me knew, even then, that you were going to change my life." Yates smiled, touching her face gently. "You changed mine. You saved it in more ways than one. I was drifting before I met you, Penelope. Just moving from place to place with no real purpose beyond survival. You gave me a reason to build something permanent, something real. You gave me a home." They kissed again, slow and tender, a promise of all the years to come. When they finally returned to the celebration, hand in hand, the stars were beginning to appear overhead, countless points of light scattered across the vast prairie sky. The first year of their marriage was one of learning and adjustment. Yates had to get used to the idea that this ranch was now his home, that he was not just a hired hand but a partner in the operation. Samuel was generous in teaching him the business side of ranching, the contracts and negotiations and relationships with buyers that kept a ranch profitable. Penelope taught him the land itself, the best grazing areas, where water could be found even in dry years, which cattle were the best breeders and which should be culled from the herd. They also learned each other, the small intimacies of married life. Yates discovered that Penelope was grumpy in the mornings until she had her coffee, that she talked to the horses like they were people, that she cried at weddings but not at funerals. Penelope learned that Yates had nightmares sometimes about the war, that he was ticklish behind his left ear, that he could not carry a tune to save his life but hummed while he worked anyway. There were disagreements, of course. Yates sometimes struggled with his pride, finding it hard to accept that Penelope often knew better than he did when it came to ranch matters. Penelope sometimes struggled with including him in decisions she had been making independently for years. But they learned to talk through their conflicts, to remember that they were partners, and that respecting each other's knowledge and feelings was more important than being right. By the spring of 1878, they had found their rhythm. The ranch was thriving under their combined management. Yates had proven himself not just a capable ranch hand, but a skilled negotiator and businessman, securing favorable contracts for their cattle and expanding their market connections. Penelope continued to manage the day-to-day operations with the same skill and dedication she had always shown. Together, they were building something greater than either could have achieved alone. It was in June of that year that Penelope told Yates she was expecting their first child. He was in the barn, shoeing one of the horses, when she appeared in the doorway with a strange expression on her face. He set down his tools immediately, concerned. "What is wrong?" he asked, moving toward her. "Nothing is wrong," Penelope said, and then she smiled, radiant and slightly terrified. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Yates felt like someone had punched him in the chest, but in the best possible way. A baby. Their baby. He pulled Penelope into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break. "Are you sure? Maria says all the signs are there, and Maria has helped birth half the babies in this county." "She is usually right about these things." Penelope pulled back to look at his face. "Are you happy? I know we have not talked much about children, but I want this baby, Yates. I want to build a family with you." "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to be parents." Samuel was delighted at the news, immediately insisting that Penelope should not be doing any heavy work around the ranch. Penelope rolled her eyes at the sudden protectiveness, but agreed to take it easier, especially as the pregnancy progressed and her body changed. Yates was hovering and overprotective in a way that Penelope found both annoying and endearing, but she tolerated it because she knew it came from love. Their son was born in February of 1879, during a cold snap that froze the water troughs and made everyone huddle close to the fires. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Maria and the local midwife. Yates paced in the hallway outside the bedroom, wearing a path in the floorboards, listening to Penelope's cries and feeling completely helpless. Samuel sat with him, offering quiet reassurance that did little to ease his worry. When Maria finally emerged, smiling broadly, and told him he had a son and that Penelope was tired but fine, Yates nearly collapsed with relief. He rushed into the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against the pillows, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. His son had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still newborn blue, but might turn brown or green as he grew. He had tiny, perfect fingers that curled reflexively when Yates gently touched them. Looking at his child, at this new life that he and Penelope had created together, Yates felt emotions so strong they defied description. Love, certainly, but also a fierce protectiveness, a determination to be the father this child deserved, to give him the stable, loving home that Yates himself had lost so young. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at her son, Penelope said, "Samuel, after my father, he has been so good to us, Yates. I want to honor that." Yates nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He leaned down to kiss Penelope's forehead, then his son's. "Samuel Xander, that is a good, strong name." Little Samuel was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to have inherited his mother's strong will and his father's easy temperament. As he grew, it became clear he had also inherited his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, a perfect blend of both parents. Samuel Dalton doted on his grandson, spending hours rocking him or carrying him around the ranch, pointing out horses and cattle and telling stories about his mother when she was young. Life settled into a new pattern, one that revolved around the rhythms of ranch work and the needs of a growing child. Yates and Penelope worked together seamlessly, managing the ranch while also caring for their son. They hired additional help so that Penelope could spend time with Samuel in the mornings before heading out to oversee the day's work. Yates learned to balance the ledgers while holding a sleeping baby in one arm. Maria became a surrogate grandmother, teaching young Samuel Spanish songs and sneaking him treats when his parents were not looking. As Samuel grew from baby to toddler to young boy, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread, and the Dalton Xander Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the region. When Samuel Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1885, at the age of 67, it was a sad but not unexpected transition. He had lived long enough to see his grandson grow into a bright, energetic 6-year-old who loved horses and the prairie as much as his mother and grandfather had. He had seen his daughter happy and thriving, the ranch secure in the hands of people who loved it and each other. It was, as Yates said at the funeral, a good life fully lived. Penelope grieved her father deeply, but she took comfort in knowing that he had been proud of her, proud of what she and Yates had built together. The ranch officially became theirs, though in truth they had been running it for years. They changed nothing about the operation, maintaining the standards Samuel had set and continuing to build on the foundation he had laid. More children followed. A daughter they named Rose was born in 1881, followed by another son, Daniel, in 1884. Each birth was a celebration, each child a blessing. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of growing children. Samuel, the eldest, took his role as big brother seriously, looking out for his younger siblings with a protectiveness that reminded Yates of Penelope. Rose was wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding before she could properly walk, giving her parents gray hairs with her adventures. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for gentling animals that even Penelope admired. Yates often thought back to that day on the open range when he had collapsed with fever, certain he was going to die alone in the vast emptiness of the prairie. He thought about Penelope riding out to find him, staying with him through the worst of the fever, refusing to leave him to his fate. That decision, that simple act of human compassion, had changed both their lives completely. It had given him everything he had ever dreamed of and so much more besides. A home, a family, a partnership built on love and respect and shared dreams. A legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the years passed, the love between Yates and Penelope only deepened. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and financial uncertainties, the normal struggles of life. But they had weathered them together, and each challenge overcome had bound them closer. They still worked side by side on the ranch, though they had capable foremen and ranch hands who handled much of the day-to-day labor. They taught their children the value of hard work, the importance of treating people and animals with kindness, the necessity of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1886, Yates took Penelope back to the cottonwood tree where she had found him. It was a cold day, winter already settling over the prairie, but the tree still stood, a lonely sentinel on the open range. They stood together in the spot where Penelope had kept her vigil all those years ago, where she had fought for his life and, unknowingly, for their future together. "I still remember how terrified I was," Penelope said, leaning against Yates as they looked out over the endless grass. "You were so sick, and I knew if the fever did not break, you would die. I kept thinking that I could not let that happen, that you were meant for something more than dying alone on the prairie. I did not know then that what you were meant for was me, was us, was the life we would build together." Yates turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. "You saved my life that day, Penelope. But more than that, you gave my life meaning. Everything I am, everything I have, everything I hope to be, it all starts with you choosing to stay when anyone else would have ridden away. I love you more than I can ever put into words. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if God grants us that grace." They kissed under the cottonwood tree, the same tree that had sheltered them in their darkest hour, now bearing witness to their joy. The wind whipped around them, cold and fierce, but they were warm in each other's arms, protected by the love they had built brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Samuel grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility around the ranch, clearly destined to one day run the operation himself. He fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a smart, capable young woman named Catherine, who reminded Yates very much of Penelope. They married in 1896, when Samuel was 17 and Catherine 18, in a wedding that was even larger and more joyous than Yates and Penelope's had been. Rose, true to her wild nature, took longer to settle down. She worked on the ranch alongside her brothers, refusing to be confined to traditionally feminine roles. She eventually fell in love with a horse trader who passed through regularly, a man who appreciated her fierce independence and matched her spirit for spirit. Daniel, the youngest, had a gift for working with troubled horses and opened a training operation on the far corner of the ranch, earning a reputation throughout the territory for his patience and skill. By 1900, Yates and Penelope were grandparents multiple times over, with Samuel and Catherine producing 3 children in quick succession. The ranch house, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, was often filled with the sounds of children playing and learning, another generation being raised to love the land and each other. Yates and Penelope had both aged, of course. Yates's dark hair had gone mostly gray, and Penelope's face showed the lines of decades spent in sun and wind. But they were still active, still involved in the ranch, still deeply in love. They often sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie they both loved so much. Sometimes they talked about the old days, remembering their courtship and early marriage. Sometimes they talked about the future, about their children and grandchildren, and the legacy they were leaving. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hand in hand, needing no words to communicate the depth of their feelings. On a summer evening in 1905, as they sat watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance, Penelope said softly, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found you that day? If I had taken a different route, or decided the strays were not worth tracking, or arrived just an hour later when it was too late?" Yates squeezed her hand. "I try not to think about it too much. The idea of never knowing you, never having this life with you, it is too painful to contemplate. But I also think that somehow, some way we would have found each other. Some things are just meant to be." Penelope smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I like that thought, that no matter what, we were destined to find each other, to love each other, to build this life together." "I was lost before you found me," Yates said quietly. "Not just that day on the range, but in every way that mattered. I had no purpose beyond survival, no dreams beyond the next job. You gave me a reason to live, Penelope. You gave me a home and a family and a future. Everything good in my life traces back to you choosing to stay when the fever came, to fighting for me when you had every reason to ride away. I will spend eternity being grateful for that choice." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, filling the vast prairie sky with light. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer in, they could hear their grandchildren laughing as they played some game before bedtime. Maria's voice drifted from the kitchen, calling everyone in for evening prayers and late snacks. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived and deeply loved. Yates and Penelope Xander lived well into old age, remaining active on the ranch until their bodies simply would not allow it anymore. They watched their children grow and their grandchildren multiply. They saw the new century arrive, bringing with it changes to the West that they sometimes understood and sometimes mourned. The open ranges they had known in their youth were increasingly fenced, the wild frontier gradually tamed into settled farmland and orderly towns. But through all the changes, their love remained constant, an anchor in shifting times. When Yates passed away in 1918 at the age of 64 after a brief illness, Penelope grieved deeply but not bitterly. She had been given 42 years with the man she loved, far more than many people ever got. They had built a good life together, raised 3 children who had become good, capable adults, created a legacy that would endure for generations. She took comfort in those facts, and in the knowledge that Yates had died knowing he was loved, surrounded by family, in the home they had built together. Penelope herself lived another 6 years, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1924 at the age of 67. She was laid to rest beside Yates in the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to mourn and to celebrate, remembering 2 people who had loved fiercely and well, who had built something lasting out of a chance meeting on the open range and the simple decision to care for another human being in need. The cottonwood tree where Penelope had first found Yates stood for many more decades, becoming something of a legend in the family. Young Xanders were told the story of how their grandmother had ridden out alone and found their grandfather dying of fever, how she had stayed with him through the worst of it, refusing to leave until the fever broke. They were told how that act of compassion had sparked a love that changed both their lives, creating the family and the ranch that they all now called home. The tree became a symbol of hope and perseverance, of the way small acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways we never anticipate, creating futures we could never have imagined. Generations later, Xander descendants still ran the ranch, still told the story of Yates and Penelope, still visited the old cottonwood tree when they needed to remember where they came from and who had fought to give them the life they enjoyed. The details might have gotten a bit embellished over the years, as family stories always do, but the essential truth remained. That sometimes love comes when we least expect it, born out of hardship and chance and the choice to stay when leaving would be easier. And in the end, that was the real legacy Yates and Penelope left behind. Not just the ranch or the family name or the material wealth they had accumulated, but the knowledge that choosing to care, choosing to stay, choosing to fight for another person's life and happiness could change everything. That love, real love, was built not in grand gestures but in the daily decision to be present, to be kind, to be a partner in the truest sense of the word. Their story became a reminder that we never know when the most important moment of our life will arrive. It might come on an ordinary day, in an ordinary place, disguised as a simple decision to help someone in need. For Yates, it came when a fever struck him down on the open range, leaving him helpless and alone. For Penelope, it came when she chose to ride out to stay, to fight for the life of a stranger who would become her everything. He had a fever alone on the open range. She rode out and stayed until it broke. And from that simple beginning, from that moment of crisis and compassion, an entire world was born. A world of love and family and legacy, of dreams built and challenges overcome, of 2 people who found in each other everything they had been searching for and so much more besides. It was, in the end, a love story for the ages, not because it was perfect or without struggle, but because it was real. Because it endured through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through all the years that God granted them together. Because they chose each other, not just once at an altar, but every single day of their lives. Because when the fever came, in whatever form it took, they stayed. They fought. They endured, together. And that, their descendants would say for generations to come, was the true measure of love. Not grand declarations or romantic gestures, though those had their place, but the quiet, stubborn determination to stay when leaving would be easier, to care when indifference would be safer, to fight for each other, for their family, for the life they built together, no matter what challenges came their way. The prairie wind still blew across the range where Penelope had found Yates all those years ago. The grass still grew tall and green in summer, turned gold in autumn, lay dormant under winter snow. The cottonwood tree stood watch over it all, its roots deep in the earth, its branches reaching toward the endless sky. And somewhere in the timeless space where love endures beyond death, Yates and Penelope still rode together across the open range, forever young, forever in love, forever bound by the choice she made on a sweltering August morning in 1876 to stay until the fever broke. Their story was told and retold, becoming part of the family mythology, but also part of something larger. It became a reminder to everyone who heard it that we are all, at various points in our lives, either the person burning with fever on the open range or the person who rides out to help. That we all have the power to change lives, including our own, through simple acts of compassion and courage. That love, the real and lasting kind, is built not in moments of ease but in moments of challenge, when we choose to stay rather than ride away. And so the story ended where it began, on the open range under the vast prairie sky, with two people whose lives intersected at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way, with a fever that broke and a love that never did, with a choice to stay that echoed through generations, creating ripples of love and family and legacy that would last as long as the prairie grass grew and the wind blew free across the land they both loved so well.